Excellent. Well, let's get started. So maybe you've thought about integrating NetSuite and Salesforce, but the thought of poorly aligned data or dirty data entering your systems has maybe stopped you. In today's COVID environment, many organizations are starting to reconsider what they need to do and what should be done to advance their workforce transformation. It's time to stop those processes that keep our team members busy, but not necessarily productive. So like peanut butter and jelly, hot dogs and baseball, bacon and eggs, salt and pepper. I know there's probably a million more that you're currently thinking in your head. NetSuite and Salesforce are also better together. So I want to go ahead and introduce some of our presenters here. Not sure if they want to come on and wave on the webcam real quick, but Miles is one of our managing consultants in the Salesforce practice at Sikich. And Chris, Miles, where are you located?
I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Yes, and Chris is out of our Boston office, and he's a managing consultant on Sikich's NetSuite team. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Michael.
Great to have you here. We really appreciate it. But before we get to the both of you, I do want to push out one poll here that we're going to get started with. We've got two of these today. So we're curious, what solutions do you already have? You can see that poll should be up now. What solutions do you already have implemented? NetSuite, Salesforce, maybe you have both NetSuite and Salesforce. Maybe you're currently just evaluating solutions. So help us better tailor the rest of the presentation, understand kind of what everyone's working with. Give everybody a minute to enter that into the polls. And while I do that, Miles, I'm going to hand this over to you.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Great. Let's see those numbers. And we'll share it. We've got about 14% that's with NetSuite, both NetSuite and Salesforce already, 57%. Excellent. This is the right place for you. And currently evaluating solutions, we've got 29%. Definitely great numbers there. Miles, I am excited to announce that you are up next.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike.
No problem.
Let me share my screen. And hopefully you guys are seeing the deck now.
Not yet, but shortly.
There we go.
Excellent.
Great.
Thanks, Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So yeah, today we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about Salesforce and NetSuite and how they work together. I'm going to give a quick overview of just some of the common areas, where we see this type of integration impacting, some technical landscape, just so we know kind of the pieces that are in play. It looks like quite a few of you already have, Salesforce and NetSuite in your technical quiver already. So we'll quickly cover that and then go over some of the benefits that we see on our projects, some of the gotchas too, and things to consider. Then I'll hand off to Chris, and he's going to cover the risk elimination. So, especially as we get into doing process alignment and, making sure there's communication across the teams and validation, and then some strategy. So making sure that we're keeping an eye on the future and knowing exactly, how our success metrics are defined, what our outcomes are, and then the ever exciting moving forward into additional phases and enhancements. So starting off, just, to kind of provide a little bit of a foundation, some of the common functions and areas that we see impacted by an integration like this. I mean, obviously ERP and CRM, some of the personas that we see participating in those systems or that have a stake in some of the data and processes that are derived from those systems. We also see, operations being impacted, Reporting is something that goes across just about every team, and everybody wants improved analytics and access to data that they can trust, so they can really make decisions off of that. And then procurement and approvals. I mean, as we get into again, back to some of the operational side of the business, making sure that that information is presented in a timely manner, or that, sales approvals, deal approvals can happen, smoothly, and there's not a lag in that, because it will impact revenue. So looking at the technical landscape, really, what we're interfacing with here from an overall, perspective is, from a Salesforce side, we're really looking at Salesforce as the system of engagement. So this is where the majority of our users are going to be performing traditional CRM functions, managing accounts and contacts, from a sales perspective, going through, those opportunities. And then, layered on top of that, we do see quite a few Salesforce related and, other party solutions that are industry specific or function specific. So, managed packages, some of the Salesforce components, but that really spans, quite a few industries. From there, as we go down a layer deeper, now we're looking at the integration between Salesforce and NetSuite. So, this oftentimes, for our clients and for projects that we're on, we're looking at, some sort of integration platform, depending on the size of the project. That could be Celigo, MuleSoft. We're really gonna take a look here at what's happening when, and how many, instances or orgs it's impacting. Are we just one CRM instance and one ERP instance, or are we multiple of each, going across the landscape? And then, obviously sometimes there's need for direct API integration or custom integration that happens. And then we get down into our ERP, which is, more often or always the case that it is our system of record. And so we're determining how we're mapping those customers and accounts, the sales orders. Once an opportunity closes on our CRM side, how that sales order is being generated and fed back into CRM, so we know the status. And then we get into items, inventory, and not listed here would be some additional invoicing and billing that tends to happen, whether it be in the ERP system or as an additional layer. Okay, so getting into some of the benefits that we see from an integration. This is really about streamlining a lot of the processes that end up siloed or orphaned. As as any organization adds technology stack to their stack, it's ideal that you would be able to fully integrate and have the time and budget to do that every time you consider adding, a new application or a new team. But that's not always the case, and more often than not, it's not.
Hey, Miles, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you good. Are you guys able to hear me all right? Okay. So
Okay, there's a lag on mine.
yeah, I think there's a little bit of lag, Chris, in your audio that I'm hearing anyway.
Gotcha. I'll try to troubleshoot. You can keep going.
Okay, great. The beauty of the webinar. Yeah, so these are some of the areas that we see. A lot of times we'll have different applications, spread out and siloed across our overall lead to cash process, billing and invoicing, data visibility, and then the workforce transformation and change management. And oftentimes that the frustration there, this could be a red box sometimes, because it ends up with somebody doing a lot of Excel work and moving things around manually. So we'll jump into each one of these and just kind of give a little bit of a high level overview of what we see as some of the benefits, and then some of the things that you should consider if you're really looking at doing a Salesforce and NetSuite integration. I think the biggest, and this is something that always comes up in the projects, are these connected handoffs. So when we're and have a lead to cash process that we're looking into, that we're reviewing, oftentimes those decision points or sign-off points are siloed. There may be a technical reason for that. There could be a structural reason within the organization, but one of the huge benefits is just really to streamline that, because that has a direct impact on your revenue. Improved responsiveness is really a added benefit of having the integration in place. But ideally, when we're streamlining and breaking down those silos, then you're able to make decisions quicker and communicate quicker with your team. You're not having to wait on an approval, or you're more easily able to troubleshoot an issue if there is an issue. If someone changes, if an opportunity for whatever reason gets stalled out, or invoices aren't being paid, we're able to see that across systems, where today you may be chasing that down or have to send an email, or just it kind of goes out into the ether, and then we only find out about it when the client calls in and complains. So just being able to have your finger on the pulse of that across the board is a huge benefit. And then data conflicts. Mike mentioned the better together and resolving that the dirty data and inconsistent data. But again, another top item that we will work with you on, and that everyone has a stake in, is making sure that we've got clean data. One thing to consider here is really a lot of the times when we have our technical stack and we have tools that we're using, we will supplement what we've done with additional tools. I mean, Salesforce is a super flexible platform, and I know NetSuite has a lot of capabilities, but it's very easy sometimes to lean on some of these tools or solutions, be it a third-party tool or something we've built custom and within either platform. But if we're considering the integration approach, then this is really a good time to take a look at those. And that's kind of our food for thought here at the bottom is, are there tools that you could eliminate through this integration? Are there things that we're using today that are kind of a stopgap measure? And it may be tools we like, it may be tools we hate, but it's definitely a good time to take a look at that and just determine, okay, it does or doesn't make sense to keep using this tool. Is there integration possibility? Should we move what we're doing today in a silo? Where does it live? Should it go into CRM? Should it go into NetSuite? What's the right place for this functionality to live? And I know Chris will talk a little bit about that here in a minute with some of the risk pieces on updating those processes.
Hey, Miles, can you hear me any better now?
Yeah, you sound good now.
All right. Yeah, and just one thought on that last slide too.
Sure.
Is typically engage in these type of projects. A lot of times what we're focusing on, and especially related to the brainstorming question, is what tools can we eliminate? Quite honestly, the biggest one I think we see is Excel, right? A lot of times folks are plugging in spreadsheets in the middle to make up where the gaps are. So I think from a tools perspective, I think the number one is Excel. The number two is people, right? And then you get a series of Microsoft Access databases, custom built applications, billing systems. So I think if you kind of take a look at your own architecture, you'll be able to pretty quickly figure out what tools are band-aids in the process, right?
Yep, that's a great point. Excel. You can do anything in Excel, but it doesn't talk to anything else.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So moving into invoicing and billing, this obviously primarily lives on the ERP side, but has a ton of value in having access to this information within CRM. But more importantly, I mean, this is for your customers. This is streamlining the complexity, those connected handoffs that we want to enable through the integration. This is realizing that benefit. If we're making sure our master price books and items are linked to products in Salesforce, those are going to live and be mastered in NetSuite, but we want all that information to flow into Salesforce at some level. And I say all, it's usually a subset of that information, so we can get a good understanding. Now we've got full visibility on either end to understand where something's at from a project standpoint or from a invoicing standpoint. Again, eliminating that having to go track someone down or to find the person who owns that Excel spreadsheet and get the update. And then just revenue, the impact on revenue, right? I mean, that's the driving factor here. That's the easily identified dividend and investment that that makes this investment worthwhile is that impact to revenue. So once you've overcome some of these hurdles and we have things set up, I think it's really a question of are there additional upsell or renewal or revenue efforts that you could put that you could pursue with your invoicing. I think a lot of times this is such a huge pain point that everyone's just focused on AR. Let's get the payments in, and we're not going back and looking at the opportunity to offer upsells. And I think that's something that this enables through streamlining and integrating these systems.
Yeah, and Miles, I think on that point too, I think a lot of times where you're looking for upsells opportunities is through trends, right? Is through what are customers' buying habits and such. Kind of like that Amazon approach. Hey, do you want this and this and this and that, right? And that's just access to information. So as much information as we can pass between these systems, I think the upsell opportunities start to present themselves better. And then also from a subscription type approach where, renewal notifications and auto generation of those renewals, that's where you can really start to drive additional revenue.
Yeah, that's a great segue into data visibility, right? I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about. And, this is a huge benefit to having those systems connected is, the three main buckets that we see are going to be sales, service, and your financial data. But, being able to see that team performance, being able to offer those upsell and renewal opportunities in a timely manner, even simple things is just knowing when a subscription contract expires. Sometimes that's even hard to track down, or the client calls and says, hey, I think something's expiring. So being able to just to really have a full view of that data, make those decisions, really sink your teeth into analytics instead of spending so much time managing, just trying to find out what the source of truth is from a data perspective. And I think, that's one thing that we see with the pain of having to track all that down, that there's usually quite a few people, quite a few resources, as Chris mentioned, involved in putting these together within organizations. So, you may have someone on the sales team who is working with somebody on your finance team to try to put together your forecast, any of your dashboarding. And so to step back and think, okay, if we do get this in place, like, what are the changes we need to make? What would access, having faith in our data, what would that mean for our team? What changes would we make from a process perspective? Instead of having a huge meeting where we're going through and questioning the data, now we've got everyone that has access to reports, and who do we want to give access to those reports, and how do we want to really leverage that data? So it definitely changes your scope and your focus a little bit once you have faith in what you're seeing is the real deal. All right. And then, kind of the last piece here from a benefits perspective. I mean, Chris did mention this a few minutes ago. Yeah, after Excel, it's the change that happens to your people, to the team that you're really focused on working with for this project. So, and beyond, right? Your day-to-day users on the client side. But first and foremost is getting that stakeholder buy-in, if from a project perspective, and then from a organizational and cultural alignment. Having the ability to look down the road and see what this is going to do to your organization, how it's going to impact those people, and then giving them the ability to refocus, because that's those Excel guardians and your technical heroes, your people that are really bending over backwards to connect some of those dots and bring those silos together. In the end result here, in the end game, when we want to free them up and not have to do those admin tasks, those clerical tasks. So how do we refocus those roles on strategy? And then, the second part of that comes next is skill development. What are we going to do and especially, with Salesforce has an awesome training culture, if you will, with certifications and trailhead. So there's a ton of information out there, but how are we going to enable, empower people to really get up to speed on some of the new tools, or to, start to be able to drive some of that new process development? And then from there, the food for thought is like, what training programs would you consider with your organization? If you're looking at an integration project, do you have budget? Normally there's train the trainer that the partner does to get you familiar with everything. But beyond that, what training could you or should you potentially consider to be included as part of the project? If you're going to need an analytics manager, if you're going to need someone to own some of these pieces that today are manual, maybe your Excel guru then starts to look at formula fields and building out reports and dashboards and kind of learn some of that new technology. So it's a great piece of the whole puzzle. All right, great. So I think now we've got another poll, so I will hand back off.
Excellent. I thought of a couple more I couldn't let go. Fish and chips, knife and fork, bread and butter. I mean, we could go on. Wine and cheese. How did I not get wine?
I'm glad you're focused on the topic at hand, Mike.
I couldn't stop thinking about it. But what we're going to do now is add another poll. We're curious, what's your biggest integration concern? We'll launch that right now. Give everybody a minute. What do you think of these, Chris, these options here about integration concerns? Risk of dirty data, misaligned data, manual data entry, human error?
I think we forgot to add in all the above.
I think that is absolutely right.
Yeah, no kidding.
Let's do a, what's your biggest integration concern?
Yeah, I think quite honestly, it would be number 3.
Yeah. Sure thing. That kind of goes back to what Miles was talking about, kind of on what do your training programs look like, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the whole general role transformation, right?
Right. Let me give everybody one more second to add in a few more votes here. Okay. I'm going to close that out and share with everyone. So we've got about 20% that are right on that risky, dirty data and misaligned data. 60% on disconnect between data flow and business processes, and then we've got that manual data entry and human error. No one said they have no concerns. I'm glad. I think that you should always have some sort of concern, right?
Otherwise, we could have ended the webinar now.
Right. Time for happy hour.
Absolutely. Chris, I'm gonna bring this over to you.
Sure.
We're gonna switch over to Chris here. You can take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay. And can you see my screen okay?
We can see it.
Excellent. Thank you. So when Michael approached us about doing this webinar, A, we didn't know he wanted us to turn our cameras on, and B, we didn't know it was going to be in Boston, 90 degrees out. So this is gel melting into my eyes. But no, what he wanted the theme to be was why do we implement, or why do we integrate NetSuite and Salesforce? And I think Miles and I's response was, well, why not? So I think, the whole common theme here is prove to me why you shouldn't integrate. Now, given that thought, what are the things that we need to think through, right? What are the risks, and how do we address those and mitigate those risks? So some of the areas that I'm going to be talking about are, what does our design process look like? What are the things that we need to think through, and some of the elements and tools that we use to do this. Certainly data cleansing, good data is key and paramount to this particular exercise. Training, right? So there's always two kind of concepts here. There's system readiness and there's people readiness. And if you don't have both of those, neither of this is going to work. The concept of book or record, we'll get a little technical there, but we'll try to kind of stay at the surface. Just general communication, risk elimination efforts that we can implement during this process. Of course, testing is a big part of integrations and must be done in a well kind of structured manner. And then data validation and how do we maintain and make sure those integrations are clean and healthy going forward. So the first one we'll talk about is our design. So we call this business process alignment, because not only are you designing an integration and the blueprints of that, but you're also in a lot of ways aligning business processes. Having bad business processes and a great integration is way riskier than having great processes and no integration, right? So we want to make sure that the processes are stable before we're automating any data movement. Some of the tools that we use here are user stories, and user stories could be, sales operation enters a opportunity in Salesforce, it gets approved, and it goes into NetSuite as a sales order. So those stories really tell how the movement of data and really validates what the business processes are. So they're in English. It's something someone non-technical can read and understand what's happening. And we want to make sure that all those stories are come to light, at least in the design phase of these projects. Architecture Visio, I think myself and a lot of folks are very visual. So you can see here we have just a very simple example of an integration architecture where it shows the records, where they live, almost their swim lanes, what the movement of data is. And then we can also use things like indexes and such to further explain in other documentation about how the data moves, what the triggers are, you know, if it's something manual, if it's something automated, and how often that happens. And then the last part of design is we really want to get down to a field level mapping. So understand if, you know, how the addresses move across and if there's custom fields, and we'll get into a bit more of that, but really getting down to the lowest level of mapping. And then of course, we do ask that this gets signed off, right? So we want to make sure that everybody's aligned to this, that nobody really has risks in the design phase, because those risks don't typically get better.
Yeah, I'll just add to that real quickly.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, just on the user story side and some of those flows. The other thing that does is, you know, gives us sign off both to start the project as well as at the end of the project. We're able to go back and leverage those during UAT and you know, give you some documentation too, as I know oftentimes when we enter into these integration projects, a lot of the processes aren't documented. The previous teams either are no longer there or you know, resources have moved on. So being able to have all this documented too, as you look down the road for the future, is super important.
Excellent point, Miles. From a data perspective, we always hear this concept of, well, I don't want to integrate these two systems because system A or system B has quote unquote dirty data, right? And I love that term, it's hilarious, but there's a lot of truth to it, right? And we're not going to blame Salesforce, and Miles isn't going to blame NetSuite, but every system has it, right? So what are the type of strategies that we can implement? Well, first of all, let's remove the unnecessary records. A, are they safe to be removed? Or maybe we just want to inactivate them or omit them from these type of integrations, but understand what type of information is no longer necessary and can then be either archived or not used. One of the kind of the easiest way to fail integrations obviously is mandatory fields. So understand where things are mandatory in both systems, upstream, downstream, because that typically comes to bite us when we say, well, this is a really important bit of information, but I don't have a value there, right? So understand where mandatory comes into play and cleanse that data to make sure you have values for each of those. Checking troublesome fields. So I think everybody in some fashion, whether it's Excel or anything, has struggled with dates and addresses. I live in the Boston area. All the addresses, zip codes start with 0, and CSVs, those go away, right? So, you know, understand where the problem areas are going to lie and really focus your attention on those. Referencing other records. So for example, if we're bringing in a contact from Salesforce into NetSuite, and that contact is associated with a customer, we have to make sure that customer exists before we can bring the contact in. And that's a really simple example of that, but it gets far more complex. So understand where you have dependencies or related records that one has to exist before the other. Unique identifiers, I probably can't stress that one enough. Understand what value on a record makes it unique, and how we can understand that a record got across and that the systems can talk to each other. So oftentimes, Miles, my team will implement unique identifiers to understand what a customer is, because in a lot of ways it's a customer is ABC company, but everybody knows that ABC company can be ABC period company, comma company. So understand where it makes sense to have unique identifiers. And then mapping. Mapping is always an exercise that's challenging in these, but you have to really understand when you're moving data across, one system may consider it something and the other system considers it something else, right? So understand where you may have to have a table to match and make sure those systems can communicate to each other. Again, earlier I talked about how you have to make sure that there's system readiness and there's people readiness. A lot of times we came in, there's excellent systems, incredible integrations, but nobody really knows what's going on. So some of the tools that we're leveraging these days are documentation. Sounds simple, but when you're under the stress of an integration, documentation seems to be the first to fall to the wayside, and I'm probably the most guilty of it. But documentation really helps, like Miles said, with leveraging those user stories later and testing, so that somebody who may be new to the organization can pick up that documentation and understand what's going on. So employee onboarding and just general business continuity. I think that's critical for. We've been doing, and especially in the whole COVID environment, is short how-to videos. And these really help. Keep them short, because I know our attention spans are all over the place. So, you know, 2 to 5 minutes on a quick how-to that you can distribute across the organization. And I think those are going a long way these days. Set expectations. What are these integrations supposed to do? What is your role going to be once the integration's there? Like Miles said, there's a lot of role transformation that happens here. So we want folks to know what their new role entails, what their new responsibilities are, and really make sure we're communicating that during the training phase. How to fix errors. So one certainty of an integration is there will be an error at some point, whether it's data related, whether it's system related. Let's make sure that users know how to troubleshoot, how to find them, and how to fix them. Again, earlier we talked about process, and process is probably one of the more important things, is have the folks understand what the whole process looks like. Yes, they may be involved in only a very small area of the process, but if they really understand the upstream and downstream effects of those processes, it may make and gain more efficiency, more accuracy, and more buy-in on that particular level. Timing, right? So everybody wants their integrations to be real time, right? There's this concept of real time, but everybody knows that not everything can be real time. Some things are set on schedule, daily routines, and maybe some real time activities. Understand when data is supposed to flow and how it's flowing. And the last one is just explain the why. Why are we doing this? Why are you involved in this particular spot in the process, and how does that fit in? Just to really get the user buying. And I think the best scenarios we've been in is when everybody's bought in and gets the process and can operate as a single unit.
Yeah, I think just to add too on the, especially like you mentioned today with COVID-19, the adoption, and Salesforce was really strong in the collaboration piece, is moving some of that documentation, and that the how-to videos are huge into Quip or chatter groups, and just being able to easily distribute that out to the team. We're seeing a lot of clients, leverage those tools even more so nowadays.
Yeah, and so often now the videos tie right into the Microsoft Teams of the world and the Zooms, so it's so much easier to distribute those now, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Although I don't like making them, but
me neither. I talk to the wall while I'm doing it.
Yeah. Well, I don't mind making it as long as I don't have to listen to it again. It's usually fine.
Yeah. We have this concept of a book of record, and here's where we're going to dip a little bit into the technical side, but what the book of record is really meant to say is that an application should own certain aspects of the data. The most common example is who owns a customer record. So it is, and the answer is not always the same. It differs environment to environment, but let's say, for example, customers are created in Salesforce and they're brought into NetSuite. It may be true that Salesforce owns that data, right? So then what we consider that is the book of record or the ownership application. And that's a really important concept, because then as we're starting to move that data across to other systems, changes, updates can all be done in one system and flow over to the other. So what we really strive to do is avoid bi-directional data movements, so that if changes to customers are being made, we understand what is the right one. So if the other application that has that same customer is not in the latest update, the field's not accurate, we can look to, quote unquote, the book of record to figure out what the truth is. So really strive to kind of avoid these bi-directional data movements to avoid knowing what the truth is, right? Avoiding moving unnecessary data. So I know Miles and I are huge proponents of move tons of data over, you'll have access to information and all these great reports, but there may be pieces of information that it doesn't make sense to move. There may be things that are unique to Salesforce that NetSuite really doesn't care about, and you have really no value bringing over. Maybe there's marketing materials or different campaigns that really from a NetSuite perspective doesn't make sense to store. Don't try to move too much. It's just going to overcomplicate and really give you less value for your investment. Unique identifiers, this is a duplicate, which is kind of ironic, Miles, but I probably brought this one over just subconsciously. Again, understand that the book of record typically will generate the unique identifier
just to set up your next point,
customer.
Removing duplicates.
Yeah, exactly. So, what we're striving to do here is to avoid duplicate, both from a duplicate within one system, but then a duplicate for multiple systems. So, we really try to one-for-one customers, Salesforce and NetSuite, unless we have some sort of rare parent-child type requirement. But yeah, it really helps with with understanding if the integrations are working accurately, and also for missing records. So if there's information that was supposed to move over that didn't, having the unique identifiers allows us to go and look up the information that may or not have moved. And then primary keys and foreign keys really relates to when we're moving data across, we want to leave some breadcrumbs. So for bringing it, for example, same scenario, we have customers going from NetSuite, from Salesforce to NetSuite. We may want to store what the Salesforce number was in NetSuite and the NetSuite number in Salesforce, right? So it's almost like a cross-reference, and we're just leaving breadcrumbs so we can later find what happened to these particular records.
Yeah, and I think this is an important point because, as you said, even though it's a little down in the weeds, I think sometimes what happens on the people side is, the non-technical people or the business owners who maybe aren't in the weeds in the project don't quite understand the impact here. And so making sure from a change management standpoint, I mean, we complain a lot about the Excel spreadsheets, but the one thing that the Excel spreadsheet gives you is control. Right? You can go and open your Excel spreadsheet, change something, and that's your book of record. But when you start to integrate these systems, decisions are going to be made where that lives, and just making sure that your team and your resources understand now, well, here's the new process, and it may or may not live in a system that you have access to. So we may want to call out that needs to be at least be exposed in Salesforce or give those resources access to those new systems. So that's one of the impacts you see when these things start to change.
And we can talk book of record all day, right?
For sure.
From a communication, I kind of have two elements here. So one, for communication as it relates to integration, we have this concept of push, pull, and alert. So one of the reasons why we're doing integrations, we want people to have access to information. And the way that we can deliver that information happens in the push, pull, and alert. So push is really a subscription type thing. I want to push all of the sales orders that have been integrated to NetSuite to a finance manager on a daily, monthly, weekly basis, right? So that's kind of a subscription type push. Pull is I want users to be able to log into these systems and pull the information they need. So maybe they're pulling that list of sales orders or orders that came over from NetSuite, Salesforce rather. And then alerts are much more of an action-based. A lot of times they're in the form of an email. And that may be something along the lines of, hey, a closed won opportunity came to NetSuite as a pending approval sales order. This is a high dollar, high visibility sales order, and you need to go and approve it as soon as you can, right? So we have these kind of concepts here in different ways users access information. And then also from a kind of more technical architecture standpoint, we have implementations and changes. So notify users when we may be changing integrations, notify them when there's upgrades or possible downtimes, keep people in the know of how these integrations are operating and when they're not operating, quite honestly. Testing. So we always laugh, no companies ever complain that they did too much testing prior to go live. Quite honestly, we're always finding those loopholes and go live, oh my God, I didn't think of that particular scenario. What we're trying to do is limit that amount of unknown. So that's what testing is really meant to do. A lot of times I get asked, what is the difference between unit testing and unit user acceptance testing? Unit testing is typically done by the technical team that is doing the integration. So they're working with small subsets of data just to make sure they can move data through the integrations that they're building. We also sometimes refer to that as the 9=9 testing, because typically developers can make their testing work perfectly, right? So user acceptance testing is really getting either the power users, super users, or just general users in to test them without hands off by the developers. And that really flushes out a lot of both process, but also training and knowledge issues that you want to avoid prior to go live. Maintain proper testing logs. So document what you're testing, pass, fail, remediated on. Understand and capture that information so that more people can see where we are in the process. And then later you can revisit those and possibly use those again for things like regression testing or understand, did we even test that scenario? A couple others is open action items. So there's always going to be some things that fall out of testing. Keep note of those and what the status are. And then ultimately have users sign off, right? Provide some ownership to the folks who are going to be running these to say, yes, we've done testing, we understand what the risks are, and we're happy to go live.
Yeah, and that's where having those user stories to test against and frame your testing is really helpful. And then yeah, as things fall into the backlog, you can potentially consider that down the road. But framing UAT, especially against user stories, is great to kind of round out that process.
Exactly. From a validation perspective, so kind of in your life cycle of the integration development, yeah, at some point you're going to be live, and just because you're live doesn't mean things won't come up, right? So have a system in place, have a process in place to deal with the issues that may happen during go live. So things like error logs, error reporting, and error notifications, and I listed them all differently. Error logs may be a bit more technical, so getting a technical resource in there to really understand what went wrong. Error reporting and error notifications are much more for the end user. Hey, something went wrong. We might need to get somebody involved, or that user might actually have the tools and knowledge to fix it. Define responsibility. You may define that integration by integration or platform by platform, but have somebody in charge for maintaining this going forward, so that when errors do happen, it's not a question mark of who's going to fix them. Missing records, quick fixes, critical errors. Categorize what errors are. How critical are they to the business? How quickly do they need to be jumped on? And what are acceptable errors? And not every error is bad. So kind of get an understanding of where do you need to make sure to pull the fire alarm and say this is all hands on deck versus something that can be handled in some time.
Yeah, and this, again, with the related to COVID, this is the short videos we talked about earlier. We're seeing clients do that here as well, since they may not be on site with the IT team, is to create a quick little video of the error they're seeing, how they got there, especially with an integration. Definitely helpful for your folks that are going to be troubleshooting that, to watch what you're experiencing. And we've definitely seen some clients doing that, especially ones that have newly become remote teams.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mel. So typically our goal is to eliminate ourselves, right? To make our clients self-sufficient, teach you how to fish. So that's a fantastic point. So we talked about the risks. Let's move into kind of the strategy, and I'll go through these pretty quick, Michael, because I know we're coming up against it. And I'll just move right into it. The first thing when we move into projects is we need to define what we want our outcomes to be. Why are we doing this project? So in a lot of times, it's for an ROI perspective. There's actual value. There may be revenue generated out of this, but have some targets, have some understanding of why we're embarking in this journey. FTE savings is always a big one. So like Miles said, the workforce transformation is real. While people used to do very clerical tasks, they may turn into analysts, where they're managing by exception instead of actually doing the data movements. Understand what errors cost your business, right? So when people are manually moving data and maintaining these spreadsheets and they make a mistake, what is the cost of that? Just general process improvements and access to information are always key ones that we're hearing. Hey, I can't get the reports I need. I can't get the information in a timely manner to make decisions. From a phasing perspective, we always talk about don't try to take on too much. You may start with saying, I just want to move customers and opportunities and contacts. Put a white picket fence around that and get it done. What we come and see is the integration projects that fail are the ones because the scope grew too much, right? So understand what are the important critical elements to take care of first, and then those nice to have and must haves need to come after. Identify the importance of each flow. So what are the critical ones? What are the ones we most need to pay attention to, which are versus ones that are more maybe informational in nature or less business critical. Ensure process before integration. Like I mentioned earlier, make sure that the business process makes sense before you move data. Integrations also give you the ability to create a lot of bad data really quickly. So make sure that the process is aligned and makes sense, and then we integrate. System readiness, we talked about a whole lot. Big picture architecture. So make sure you keep your eye on the ball. So you may be integrating NetSuite and Salesforce. There may be other applications in there. Have a general architecture strategy as you're moving through this kind of journey. You also have to think about what is your appetite for risk. If you're an e-commerce company and you're getting 50,000 orders a day, you may make very small changes. If you're a low volume organization, you may make a lot of changes really quickly. So kind of think about what is your appetite and what is the business risk for making these changes as you're phasing this project. From an approach, we have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that, yeah, and I think that's a good point too, that, really consider what your resources can handle. Because most of the time we don't have a fully dedicated team on the client side. And so just making sure that we're all on the same page with timing, and you may have an appetite for a more aggressive timeline, but you may only have 2 or 3 people that are working on this part-time or full-time, and another handful of people that are really, this is a smaller part of what they're doing day to day. So just understanding what that looks like.
Exactly. This is not your full-time job, right?
Yeah, that's right.
From an approach,
running.
From an approach perspective, we kind of break it down into 3 elements, and there's obviously a million subsets to this, but in terms of what is an integration, we have kind of 3. So one is custom integrations. This is coding in web services, REST, and other types of technologies out there. What this is purely custom coding. Requires you to have a strong development staff and really proficient understanding of what the data structures are. This may be beneficial for organizations that are doing very, very light integrations that don't have a need for a big beefy tool and have a developer that really gets these. For kind of the lowest of the road here. Miles, can I just touch on external data objects quickly?
Yeah, so no, this is something Salesforce offers, and there's a few different flavors, but the concept is really, pulling data into view without having to store that data, in the other system. So if you want to view ERP data, NetSuite data within Salesforce, but not fully store all that and take up space and have a fully baked, data map for that, then this is a great way to at least expose some of that data and make some business decisions there from a CRM side.
Yeah, perfect. And then the last one is middleware, and this is the path that we're seeing most common. These are middleware tools such as Celigo or MuleSoft, and there's a lot out there. But what these have is, obviously a reduced code base. So they're applications in themselves. You've heard the terms of iPaaS and integration cloud. That's what these tools really offer. So you have things like point and click mapping. So they're literally like drag and drop. They're really based more, less on developers and more on maybe a technical analyst type, and it varies in your skill sets. Typically, they come with really robust error logging. Governance is a big one. We have to understand that both of these technologies are cloud-based, and these cloud-based systems don't let people just hammer millions of records in at once, right? We have that concept of noisy neighbor. So we have to abide by the rules that Salesforce and NetSuite have given us in terms of governance. And then they also have pre-built connectors. So these are connectors that really understand the way NetSuite and Salesforce handle, process, view data. So it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. And it also helps for things like upgrades, where these systems, again, are web-based, they upgrade all the time. The connectors also upgrade, so you don't have to worry about versions breaking your integrations.
And 10 times out of 10, the documentation for the middleware pre-built connectors is going to be better than custom integrations.
10 out of 10. Centralization. So we want to make sure that there's a group that's owning the entire integration. Typically, this is a system admin, just to make sure that there's central ownership. If there's too many hands in the pot, there's too many people owning it, it's too hard to manage and keep a handle on these integrations. Have a good project management, have a set project, have a scope, have a time frame, and stick to it as best you can, right? These should not be projects that you just start and say, well, we'll finish when we finish, because they never will, right? And then be a liaison to the business, so understand the business requirements. But the funniest one I have is the biggest thing that I can be to an organization is the no man, right? Understand when to tell the business no. That's not a realistic ask, not a realistic expectation, and don't be afraid to say no if it doesn't make sense. I think this one kind of goes without saying, but make sure that there's buy-in from the top, right? Again, from the whole ROI perspective, make sure that this is a a journey that your organization wants and needs to embark on. Otherwise, there won't be backing behind it. There's going to be hard decisions to be made during these. So make sure you have the folks at the top aligned, and make sure it's a part of your strategy, your alignment of your organization, the path that you're in, the journey that you want to go forward with.
Yeah, especially if there's going to be decisions that need to be made that impact multiple teams, multiple executives, and multiple groups. You want to make sure you're set up to make those decisions together with some project governance.
Exactly, and it certainly helps those business process sessions, right?
Yeah.
And then last, enhancements. So, you know, a good rule of thumb is that this project is never complete. Once you kind of get and understand the power of these integrations, there will always be more things that, oh, I could integrate this, I can integrate that. And that's kind of the benefit of this, right? So it's an ever evolving door of upgrades you can do here. Understand the impacts of those. Rate the feature requests. So you're going to get a lot of requests. Make sure that you're still using that critical eye and saying, well, which ones are important, which ones are quite honestly revenue generating or expense minimizing, but make sure it aligns to the strategy of what you're trying to do. Every enhancement should come with also regression testing. So going back to, like Miles said, those user stories, your changes, and you may not even know it, may affect existing processes. So make sure you retest the entire thing as you're making changes so that you're not building and breaking at the same time. And then again, the whole KISS methodology. Quite often we've come and we've seen integrations that are too complex where nobody understands what's going on. And those are the hardest to manage and the quickest to fail. So make sure simple is actually harder, but strive for that.
Excellent, Chris, Miles.